Welcome to Hull & Estates and Succession Planning, a series of podcasts hosted by Ian Hull and Susanna Popovic-Montag. The podcast you're listening to will provide information and insights into estate planning in Canada from the offices of Hull & Hull in Toronto. Here are Ian and Susanna.
Hi, and welcome to Hull & Estates and Succession Planning. You're listening to and possibly watching episode 213. Welcome back. I am doing another solo podcast without my compatriot, Susanna, but we wanted to continue with our ongoing theme of estate administration issues that can rise up, bubble up, and create tension and possibly litigation or the like. So we were talking about some of the things we've been doing. I've just had my first tour of my old alma mater, North Toronto Collegiate. They tore it down, or they're about to tear it down, and they built a new school right beside it. And I was touring it last night, enjoyed that. It was a great thrill to be in the school. But I had a chance to, as I talked about in my last podcast, I had a chance to chat with my son's accounting teacher. And we were talking about some of the basic accounting models and so on that they're teaching, of course, at the high school level. And it really struck me as one of these things that it's one of those life skills that carries on forever. And whether you're balancing your own checkbook when you're older, and these are the sorts of issues that arise in the estate administration world. And before we get into the second part of the equation, that is liabilities, or issues that arise out of liabilities when you're doing an estate administration, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the accounting obligations too. Because when we sit down, and what we're trying to do in this mini-series is talk a little bit about what's it like to be an executor, A, and B, where are the issues that can arise that may bring some criticism upon me as the executor or upon my clients. And the one area that we see time and time again is not bringing in all the assets. And we talked about that in my last podcast. That's the credits. The credits aren't all brought in, or they're not all identified like the teacup illustration that we used, or you missed an account, or so on. The other part of it is that once we start to bring in, how are we tracking it? Are we keeping vigilant, clear, and unquestioned records, financial records? And of course, depending on when we see our clients, that question can change and that answer can change. Because what we try to tell our clients is, once you've been given the job, and one of the things, and certainly in Ontario and throughout Canada, is that once the person passes away, as executor, named in the will, you have responsibility from that moment on. Now that's important, obviously, because that executor has control of the body and has to deal with those sorts of funeral issues. But it also means right from the get-go you're required to produce and undertake comprehensive accounting. So when we go out and do our due diligence, and we go and flip through every piece of paper that we think we need to look at to determine all the credits, we need to track that. And we need to identify, once we get that bank account, we need to put that bank account into a separate estate account, and once it's in that account, identify the entry, the journal entry that we learned in high school accounting. Make sure that journal entry is identified each time with the supporting document behind. Now this is sort of 101 accounting, but it is crucial that whenever an executor takes on that business role, that the accounting obligation is paramount, because that is where your Achilles heel can come at the other end of the day, when criticisms arise of your work. And it's not always going to happen, but it always diffuses it if you can put together even informal accounts for the beneficiaries from time to time. We've talked about in the past on lots of these podcasts the need to keep the beneficiaries up to date and identify what's going on in the estate administration. And one of the easy ways to do it is, of course, just do an informal accounting. You're doing it anyway, and produce it maybe once a month or every few months to the beneficiaries, so they see where the money is coming and, of course, where it's going. So I'm not going to focus too much on the estate accounting issues, other than the harsh reality of, if you don't do it right from the get-go, you will create tremendous stress on your own administration, and ultimately you may well get criticized, and you may well have to go to court to defend your actions. All right, So that's the three-part component. We've got the assets, bringing them in, we've got the accounting obligations throughout, and the other part of it, concurrent with all this, of course, is what are the liabilities? What is the debit side of estate accounting? And it's not just paying the Visa bill, not just paying the lease payments off, or those sorts of things, obvious things on the date of death. Someone dies, they've accumulated liabilities. It's also looking at, in real detail, what's going to happen in this estate. And what I tell my clients often is I say, look, sit down and make sure you've got enough credits and you've got not enough debts so that you've got a solvent estate. Determine right from the outset if that is even going to be an issue. I take a deep breath and I think, easy question to ask, hard question to answer, because lots of time you don't have that information at the outset. And lots of times, unfortunately, you find out that the estate is going to be underwater and it is not going to be able to fulfill all of its obligations, both its current obligations like paying Visa and so on, and secondly, the obligations under the will. So I call that sort of the gray area administrations. And of course, we have to be very mindful of that. And as executors, I tell my clients, we have to make sure that everybody understands that. Again, just be transparent. The case law actually insists that if you're going to be an executor, to the extent, and we won't get into all the detail, but basically the case law says, make sure you identified all your creditors as soon as possible that you are not solvent, or that you may have trouble paying all of the creditors' bills. And the same goes to the beneficiaries. Say the estate has $100 and the bills are $80 and there's only $20 left. Well, you've only got $20 to pay out whatever the will has asked you to pay out. So the sooner we tell the beneficiaries, hey, here are the fixed credits, here are the liabilities fixed, and here's going to be our profit, so to speak, at the end of the day. Here's our capital that's going to be left to be distributed in accordance with the will. I like to tell my clients to push that information out as soon as possible. And certainly when you're in a gray area administration, when you can see right from the outset that this is going to be close, it's so important to disclose and communicate that status. Not just the detail, but the reality that although they're named in a will, it's a fantasy. They're not going to get the kind of distributions they thought they would get under that will because there simply isn't enough money after we pay off the debts. So the liabilities identifying is crucial. And so when we get in an executor's role, sometimes we get a little fixated on, well, what's the credits? What's out there? What are the assets? Well, we need to be, and I tell my clients, we need to be just as vigilant to take out the debts and look at where we're going with the debt side. And as I say, lots of state administrations aren't in the gray area. We're not always sort of bumping around 0 or +1 in terms of the net assets. But sometimes we're surprised. And we've been involved in this office many times with multi-million-dollar estates that turn out to be below 0. And so we just try to assess that as we can, going along as early as we can. So particulars of the liabilities, again, is something that is a paramount obligation of the executors, and we need to, I tell my clients, we need to pull that together as fast as we can. So we've got the three-part components here of the credits, the accounting obligations, the journal entry work that you're going to have to do, and the debits. That gives us a little bit of background in terms of, and maybe it's an economic analysis in terms of our business role as executors. So thanks again. We miss Susanna for this podcast again, but we know she'll be back soon. And we appreciate always you watching and listening. Thanks very much.
You have been listening to Hall on Estate and Succession Planning by Ian Hall and Susanna Popovic-Montag. The podcast that you've been listening to has been provided as an information service. It is a summary of current issues in estates and estate planning. It is not legal advice, and you're reminded to always speak with a legal professional regarding your specific circumstance. To listen to other Hall & Hall podcasts or leave any questions or comments, please visit our website at hallestatemediation.com.